You know, sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that end with a wedding or a kiss in the rain. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the ones that live in glances, in missed moments, in friendships that carry a weight nobody else can see. And this is one of those stories. It was 1994 when Sandra Bullock walked onto a film set that would change her life forever. She was relatively unknown then, a hopeful actress who had done small roles here and there, still waiting for the moment that would prove to the world she belonged in this industry. The film was called Speed, an action thriller about a bus that couldn't slow down without exploding. But nobody on that set knew they were about to create something far more explosive than any special effect, a connection between two souls that would last 3 decades and counting. Keanu Reeves was already gaining attention in Hollywood, but he wasn't the global icon he would later become. He was quiet, thoughtful, almost painfully humble for someone with his natural screen presence. When Sandra first met him during rehearsals, she noticed something different about him immediately. He wasn't like the other leading men she had encountered, the ones who walked into rooms expecting admiration, who treated co-stars like accessories to their own glory. Keanu listened. He made eye contact. He remembered the names of crew members and asked about their families. Sandra found herself watching him when she thought no one was looking. There was a gentleness in the way he moved through the chaos of the set, a kindness in how he spoke to everyone from the director to the person bringing coffee. She didn't want to admit what she was feeling. This was work. This was professional. She was here to prove herself as an actress, not to develop feelings for her co-star. But the heart doesn't follow schedules or career plans. During the filming of their most intense scenes together, trapped on that bus, lives hanging in the balance, something shifted between them. The chemistry was undeniable. Everyone on set could feel it. The director would call cut, and Sandra and Keanu would linger just a moment too long, their eyes holding conversations their mouths never started. The electricity was real, raw, and completely unspoken. Years later, Sandra would describe those months of filming as some of the most confusing of her life. She was falling for this man, slowly and deeply, but she convinced herself it was one-sided. How could someone like Keanu, so talented, so effortlessly magnetic, ever look at her as more than a colleague? She buried her feelings beneath professionalism and laughter, turning their connection into a friendship she told herself was enough. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that across every shared scene, every late-night conversation about life and dreams and fears, Keanu Reeves was fighting the exact same battle within himself. He was falling for her too, but he never said a word. Not then. Not during the wrap party when they hugged goodbye and promised to stay in touch. Not during the press tour where they sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching, answering questions about the film while avoiding the biggest question of all. The movie became a massive success. Sandra Bullock became a household name overnight. Their careers launched into different stratospheres, carrying them to separate corners of the world, into different relationships, different chapters of life. But through every triumph and heartbreak, through marriages and losses and the kind of pain that reshapes a person entirely, they remained in each other's lives. 30 years passed. 30 years of wondering. 30 years of what-ifs that neither of them spoke aloud. And then, one night on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, with cameras rolling and millions watching, someone finally asked Sandra Bullock the question that had been whispered for 3 decades. The question about Keanu. Sandra's expression shifted. The audience fell silent. And in that moment, everyone watching knew whatever came next was going to change everything they thought they understood about love, timing, and the beautiful tragedy of missed chances. Jimmy Fallon leaned forward in his chair, a playful smile on his face, expecting the usual Hollywood deflection. A laugh, a witty redirect, maybe a joke about being just friends. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, phones already recording, ready to capture whatever polished answer Sandra Bullock would deliver. But Sandra didn't laugh, she didn't deflect. Instead, she went quiet. Her eyes softened in a way that told everyone watching this wasn't going to be a rehearsed response. This was something she had carried for a very long time, something she had never fully said out loud in front of the world. "You want to know if I loved Keanu?" she repeated, her voice thoughtful, almost tender. She looked down at her hands for a moment, and when she looked back up, there was a vulnerability that felt startlingly rare for someone who had spent decades mastering the art of public composure. "I was absolutely smitten with him," she admitted. "From the moment I met him, he is, unlike anyone I've ever known in this industry. And yes, I had the biggest crush. The kind that keeps you up at night. The kind that makes you nervous before scenes because you're terrified he'll somehow see it in your eyes." The audience let out a collective sound, something between surprise and emotional recognition. Jimmy himself seemed caught off guard by her honesty, leaning back slightly as if giving her space to continue. Sandra smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carries weight, the kind that holds years of reflection behind it. "But here's what I didn't know back then," she continued. "I spent that entire film convinced I was the only one feeling it. I told myself there was no way someone like Keanu, someone that talented, that genuine, that effortlessly wonderful, could ever see me as anything more than a coworker. So I never said anything. I protected myself by pretending it wasn't real." She paused, letting the words settle. "And then, years later, I found out the truth." The studio fell completely silent. Even Jimmy, known for his quick wit and constant energy, simply waited. "Keanu admitted in an interview that he had a crush on me too, during Speed. The whole time." Sandra shook her head slowly, a soft laugh escaping her lips, but there was something bittersweet underneath it. "We were both falling for each other, and neither of us said a word. We were both too scared, too uncertain, too convinced the other person didn't feel the same way." She looked directly into the camera, and for a moment it felt like she was speaking to one person, maybe to Keanu himself, maybe to everyone who had ever let fear silence their heart. 30 years, she said quietly. 30 years of wondering what might have happened if one of us had just been brave enough to say something. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. They sat in the kind of silence that only comes when something deeply human has been spoken, when a truth resonates so powerfully that noise feels like an intrusion. But Sandra wasn't finished. What she said next would shift the entire conversation from romance into something far deeper, something that revealed who Keanu Reeves truly is when no cameras are watching. "Let me tell you something about that man," Sandra said, her voice growing stronger. "Let me tell you what he did for me when my world fell apart, when I thought I had lost everything, when I didn't know how I was going to survive the next day." In 2010, Sandra Bullock was living what appeared to be a dream. She had just won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in The Blind Side, the highest honor her profession could offer. She stood on that stage, holding the golden statue, thanking her husband Jesse James, calling him the love of her life in front of millions of viewers worldwide. 5 days later, her entire world collapsed. The news broke like a bomb. Jesse James had been unfaithful, not once, not twice, but repeatedly throughout their marriage. The scandal exploded across every tabloid, every news channel, every corner of the internet. Sandra went from Oscar-winning triumph to public humiliation in less than a week. The same media that had celebrated her was now dissecting her pain, analyzing her marriage, questioning whether she had been naive, whether she should have seen the signs. She disappeared from public view almost immediately, stopped answering calls, stopped leaving her house. The woman who had made millions laugh, who had built a career on warmth and relatability, was now hiding from the world, drowning in a grief and shame she had never prepared for. What the public didn't know was that during those darkest weeks, when Sandra couldn't bring herself to speak to almost anyone, one person refused to let her disappear completely. Keanu Reeves. He didn't call with empty words of comfort. He didn't send flowers with generic cards. He didn't wait for her to reach out when he knew she was too broken to ask for help. He just showed up. Sandra would later describe it privately to close friends, her voice breaking as she recounted the memory. She was sitting alone in her living room, curtains drawn, phone turned off, wondering how she was supposed to rebuild a life that felt like ashes in her hands. And then she heard a knock at her door. She almost didn't answer. She couldn't face anyone. Not friends, not family, certainly not anyone from the industry that now felt like a stage for her humiliation. But something made her walk to the door, Something made her look through the peephole. And there was Keanu, standing on her porch, holding nothing but a bag of takeout food and a look of quiet, unwavering concern. He didn't say much when she opened the door. He didn't offer advice or try to fix anything. He simply said, "I thought you might need someone to sit with you. You don't have to talk. I'll just be here." And that's exactly what he did. For hours, they sat together in her living room, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing memories from their speed days, laughing softly at inside jokes that felt like lifelines to a version of herself she thought she had lost. He didn't ask questions about Jessie. He didn't reference the scandal. He simply reminded her through his presence alone that she was still Sandra, still worthy of friendship, still deserving of kindness, still capable of surviving this. He came back the next day, and the day after that. "He never made me feel like a victim," Sandra would later say. "He made me feel like a person who was going through something hard but who was going to be okay. He believed in my strength when I had forgotten I had any." But Keanu's kindness during Sandra's darkest chapter was only one half of the story. Because what Sandra would do for Keanu during his own season of unimaginable loss would prove that their bond was never one-sided. It was a friendship forged in mutual understanding of life's deepest pain. Before Sandra's world shattered in 2010, Keanu Reeves had already walked through a darkness that most people cannot imagine. In 1999, Keanu's girlfriend Jennifer Syme was 8 months pregnant with their daughter. They had already chosen a name, Ava. They had already imagined a future filled with first steps and bedtime stories and the kind of love that transforms everything. Keanu, for the first time in his life, was allowing himself to dream of a family, of something permanent, of a life beyond the transient world of Hollywood. And then, without warning, Ava was stillborn. The grief was annihilating. Keanu and Jennifer tried to stay together, tried to find their way back to each other through the impossible weight of losing a child, but the pain was too consuming. They separated, both of them shattered in ways that don't fully heal. 18 months later, Jennifer was killed in a car accident. She was only 28 years old. Keanu lost his daughter. Then he lost the woman he had planned to raise that daughter with. In the span of less than 2 years, the future he had dared to imagine was entirely erased. He didn't talk about it publicly. He didn't seek sympathy or use his tragedy to build a narrative of resilience for the press. He simply carried it, quietly, privately, with a dignity that came at an enormous personal cost. Those who knew him during that period described a man who was present but distant, kind but unreachable, going through the motions of his career while processing grief that had no clear end. Sandra was one of the few people who understood. Not because she had experienced the same loss. No one can fully understand the death of a child except those who have lived it. But because she recognized the way grief can hollow a person from the inside while leaving them standing on the outside. She saw it in his eyes during their press tour for the Lake House in 2006, the film that reunited them 12 years after Speed. On set, she made a quiet decision. She would be for Keanu what he would later become for her, a presence without pressure, a friend without conditions. She didn't ask him to share more than he wanted to share. She didn't try to pull words out of wounds that were still bleeding. Instead, she simply stayed close. She brought lightness when she could. She let him be silent when silence was what he needed. One afternoon, between takes on the lake house, they sat together on the edge of a dock overlooking the water. The crew was resetting for the next shot, and for a few minutes it was just the two of them. "Do you ever wonder why we keep finding our way back to each other?" Keanu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sandra looked at him, at this man who had endured losses that would have destroyed lesser people, who still showed up every day with kindness and professionalism, and a gentleness that never demanded recognition. "Maybe because we're supposed to," she said simply. "Maybe some people are meant to be in each other's lives, not always in the ways we expect, but in the ways we actually need." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He just looked out at the water, and Sandra saw something in his expression that she would carry with her for years. A flicker of peace, fragile but real, as if her words had reached something inside him that had been waiting to be reached. They never became a romantic couple. They never dated, never kissed, never crossed the line from friendship into something the tabloids could sensationalize. But what they built was arguably more rare. The world has a narrow definition of love. We see it in movies, in songs, in fairy tales. Love is passion, romance, possession. Love is two people who can't resist each other, who fall into each other's arms and never let go. But Sandra and Keanu's story asks a different question. What if love can be something quieter, something steadier, something that doesn't need a label to be real? Back on Jimmy Fallon's stage, Sandra took a breath and continued speaking, and the words that came next silenced any remaining whispers of gossip or speculation. People always want to know if we ever dated, if we ever got together, if there's some secret romance we've been hiding, she said. And I understand why. The chemistry was real. The feelings were real. But what we have is something I actually think is more valuable. She paused, choosing her words with care. Keanu has been there for me during moments when I didn't believe anyone would stay. He's seen me broken, ashamed, terrified, and he never once made me feel like I had to perform strength I didn't have. He just stayed. Her voice wavered slightly, and she let it. She didn't hide the emotion. And I hope I've been that for him too. I hope that when he needed someone to sit in the darkness with him, I was able to be even a fraction of what he's been for me. Jimmy Fallon, visibly moved, asked the question that was now hanging in the air. So what would you call what you two have? Sandra smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded. I would call it love, she said. Not the kind that fits into a romance movie, the kind that's harder to explain but maybe more enduring, the kind that doesn't need anything from the other person except for them to keep existing in the world, the kind that says, I see you, I value you, and I'm grateful you're alive. She looked directly at the camera again, and this time there was no ambiguity about who she was speaking to. Keanu, if you're watching this, I hope you know, I hope you've always known. The audience erupted. Not in the usual talk show applause, but in something more emotional, cheers mixed with tears, people rising to their feet, moved by a love story that didn't follow any traditional script but felt more honest than any Hollywood romance. And somewhere, watching from a quiet room, Keanu Reeves was listening to every word. 3 days after the Jimmy Fallon interview aired, Sandra's phone rang. She was at home, still processing the overwhelming response to her confession. The clip had gone viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people from every corner of the world sharing their own stories of almost loves and meaningful friendships, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable in public. But none of that prepared her for the name on her caller ID. I watched it, Keanu said when she answered. No hello, no small talk. Just his voice, steady and warm, carrying 30 years of shared history in 3 simple words. Sandra felt her heart tighten, and there was a pause, not uncomfortable but weighted, the kind of pause that holds everything unsaid. I've never had anyone describe what we are as accurately as you did, he finally said. I've never known what to call it. Other people wanted to put labels on us, wanted to make us a romance or dismiss us as just colleagues, but you found the words I never could. Sandra closed her eyes, letting his voice wash over her. You said you hoped you've been there for me the way I've been there for you, Keanu continued. Sandra, you have, more than you know. There were days after Jennifer, after Ava, when I didn't know how to keep going, and somehow you were always there, not pushing, not fixing, just present. She couldn't speak. The tears were coming now, silent and unstoppable. I need you to hear something, Keanu said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. I have loved you for 30 years, not in the way the world expected, not in the way that makes headlines, but in a way that has made me a better man. Knowing you exist, knowing you're out there, knowing that someone like you chose to stay in my life, that has saved me more times than I can count. Sandra finally found her voice. Then why didn't we ever try? Why didn't we take the chance? Keanu's answer came slowly, thoughtfully, the way he said everything that mattered. Maybe because this was always what we were supposed to be. Maybe the universe knew that what we needed wasn't a relationship that could end. We needed something permanent, something that could survive anything. And look at us, Careers rising and falling, marriages beginning and ending, losses that should have broken us forever. Through all of it, we're still here, still connected, still choosing each other. He let the words settle before continuing. Maybe the love story everyone wanted us to have would have burned out. But this has lasted 3 decades. This will last the rest of our lives. Sandra wiped her eyes, laughing softly through her tears. So what happens now? She asked. Keanu's response was simple, and it was everything. Now nothing changes, because nothing needs to. I'll still call you when the world feels too heavy. You'll still be the first person I want to share good news with. And when either of us is drowning, the other will show up, just like we always have. Sandra smiled, feeling something settle deep inside her, something that had been restless for 30 years finally finding peace. I love you, Keanu. I love you too, Sandra. I always have.